You've got to get up pretty early in the morning to speak to America's hardworking farmers and food producers. We should know. FLM Harvest is a strategic, full-service creative consultancy proud to reach more farmers, farmer boards, and food and commodity associations than any agency in the country. And we understand omni-channel as well as we understand the journey from field to fork. Most importantly, we connect clients to the audiences that matter to them.
Hello and welcome to Agri-Pulse TV for the Meet the Farm Hands video segment. I'm your host Hannah Pagel, and today I'm joined by Bev Paul with the Gordley Associates. Bev, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So why don't we just start by going back to where you're from, and then how did you end up out here in DC?
Okay, great. Well, I'm a farm girl from Nebraska, as many people know. I grew up on a mostly corn farm. Now it's a corn and soybean farm. Once upon a time, there used to be other crops, wheat, milo, the occasional sunflower field. So I'm a Nebraskan, and I came to Washington right after I graduated from college. I worked for Senator Bob Kerrey from Nebraska. He ran for the Senate, and it was my first job out of college working on a political campaign. He won and asked me to come with him, which is how people think this always happens, and in fact it hardly ever does. But I came with him, and then I wasn't doing ag policy at that time, of course. I was 22 right out of college. But over the period of years, I ended up coming back to Washington, working for him again, and handling his agriculture and trade portfolio.
And then after working for him, where did you go?
So after I worked for Senator Kerry, when he decamped and moved to New York, I stayed and worked for Senator Ben Nelson, who followed him in the Senate. I stayed with him until the end of the 2002 Farm Bill. And then I moved here to Gordley Associates, where I work for John Gordley and spend most of my time working on issues for the American Soybean Association.
Okay. Now I've been told that you're a big advocate and very passionate about research. So what specifically drew you to research, or what areas of interest in that sector do you like?
Oh, so ag research is one of my favorite issues. It's a hard one. I didn't handle that when I first came to Gordley Associates. At that time, Krista Harden handled the research portfolio. And I remember when John told me she was leaving, my first thought was, I don't know anything about ag research. It was a little bit harder to learn. And at that time, we still had congressional earmarks. So you would have different states and different universities that had earmarked funding for soybean research. So I had to try to learn all of those. Of course, they were very protective of them. Those earmarks are all gone now. But over time, I mean, really the kind of leadership for the American Soybean Association on ag research issues has been driven by farmers. It's that we've had different farmers who have been passionate about ag research, and as staff, you come along behind them. And so I've learned a lot about research. It's a really fun issue to work on in a little broader and different group of stakeholders than more traditional ag issues.
How has agricultural research changed throughout, on Capitol Hill from when you first started to now?
Oh, well, without earmarks, it's certainly changed a great deal. There used to be a whole business involved in getting earmarks for different projects. Of course, states that had senators or members of Congress who were appropriators, were really at the forefront of that game, and that's why you would see a lot of ag research being done in places like Mississippi or Missouri, where they had longtime appropriators. Those days are over. So the focus for ag research has really moved more to competitive research. It's hard because there's still this history and still a lot of people who remember that when something goes wrong, what you should do is go get an earmark out of Congress. Congress is increasingly unwilling to do that, and I think that's probably for the better. But it's going to take a long time before we move to a situation where more and more of the research dollars are awarded competitively.
Okay. Now you've also had a hand in crop insurance throughout your career. So can you tell me how you've helped build and broaden crop insurance legislation throughout your career, and how has it changed from when you first started to now?
Crop insurance. So between when I first lived in Washington, right after Senator Kerry was elected, and when I came back, I left and went to graduate school at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. After I graduated there, I moved back to Omaha and found myself working for a crop insurance company in Council Bluffs called American Agri-Assurance, or AMAG. And AMAG had just developed the first revenue insurance product. This was in 1995, 1996. And my boss there, a guy named Rick Gibson, was a smart man who understood that having the first privately developed revenue product, while you might have a product that farmers wanted to buy, and in fact they did want to buy it, getting it approved by the FCIC Board of Directors was going to be as much based on politics as on policy. And so I had a political background. They hired me. We did get that policy approved. It was the first 508H policy to be approved. And of course, it went on to change the entire crop insurance industry. I mean, revenue insurance really dominates the crop insurance portfolio for those crops that have it available. After I worked there, I ended up getting a call from Senator Kerry saying, I need a new ag LA, would you come back? And so I moved back to Washington, and this was in 1997. It was right when the ag economy was collapsing, but Freedom to Farm had just passed, and Congress wasn't willing to move away from that sort of policy perspective on agriculture. So Congress decided that they were going to spend more money on crop insurance. And so lo and behold, I had just worked for this crop insurance company. We had worked very closely with Senator Kerry and Senator Pat Roberts to get that policy approved by the FCIC board. And so those two senators got together and told their staff, Mike Seifert, who worked for Senator Roberts, and me, let's write a crop insurance bill. And we did, and the rest is history.
Okay. Who would you say were some of the big players that you worked with or worked against, like back when you first started, and then like today? How have they changed?
Agriculture has always been more bipartisan than other industries. And that makes it fun. But so everybody knows that in a farm bill situation, your fights are really more regional than partisan. That's been true throughout. When we did that crop insurance bill, that turned out to be definitely regional, not partisan. Senator Roberts' staffer, Mike, I remember very early on, this was a brilliant decision, came to me and said, we got to count the votes. We need more than just the Midwesterners. And so he went out and made sure that, at that point it was Senator Santorum from Pennsylvania, made sure that he was in our camp so we'd have enough votes to pass that piece of legislation. I think that's still the situation now. Agriculture is more partisan, like everything is more partisan, unfortunately. But it is still mostly, a regional fight.
Okay. Can you explain your worst experience along with your best experience that you've had on Capitol Hill?
Oh, worst. Well, every conference that I ever worked on was misery. Anybody who's watching this that ever worked on a conference committee knows that to be the case. I remember on the 2002 Farm Bill Conference, at that time I was working for Senator Nelson, but I was helping out Senator Daschle's staff on the conference. I remember we worked, I think it was a 3-month conference, we worked every single day except for Easter Sunday. Every single day. At that point I had a toddler. I remember hiring 2 babysitters for Saturdays because 1 babysitter wasn't enough if my husband was out of town. So that was misery. That's the sort of thing that when you do it and you live through it, it's battle scars, but you don't want to do it again. Mm-hmm. Best experience, when I worked in the Senate, we had a group. I just was reminiscing with my former boss, Bob Kerrey, about this just last week. We had a group called the Ag Chicks. A number of the senators that we worked with closely, Senator Baucus, Senator Daschle, Senator Grassley, Senator Harkin, all had young female ag staffers. Again, it was bipartisan. It was a great experience. We had a great time together.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you worked for Senator Kerry, and did you work for him while he was campaigning for president?
I did that too.
Okay.
That was another experience that you want to do once, but only once.
So explain a little bit more, what was it like working for him as a personal staffer, but then also on his campaign? How did your role change as a staff member?
So at that time, I was scheduling for him. So I did scheduling on a presidential campaign. I decamped to New Hampshire for a couple of weeks, I don't know, maybe a month. It was misery in New Hampshire in the winter before the New Hampshire primary in February. And Senator Kerry dropped out of the race pretty early. It was March 5th. It was my birthday, I'll always remember. So he wasn't in it for a long time. But certainly a presidential campaign just sucks the air out of everything. It's a great experience. I never want to do it again.
Mm-hmm. What would you tell the staffers who are going through the same process right now with all of these campaigns starting up? What advice would you give them?
eat better, get more sleep.
Okay, the basics.
Yeah, take care of yourself. It's a long, long ride.
So let's switch gears a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about your family.
Oh, great. I have 2 teenage daughters and a husband. They're terrific. We're all headed to Argentina at the end of this week, where my husband is from. And we have a fun family life. Washington, D.C. is a really fun place to raise kids, as it turns out.
How did your husband come from Argentina, or how did you guys meet?
Oh, we met in graduate school at the LBJ school in Texas.
Very nice. Now, I've been told that you and your daughters have started a project of bottle feeding kittens. Can you explain a little bit on how that started up?
Oh, sure. We're fostering kittens for the Humane Rescue Alliance. They have, many animal shelters do now, have a program for all of the kittens that are born in the spring and summer, where they, have to get volunteers because there are just so many. And in fact, I remember hearing one time that at many shelters, they try to be no-kill shelters, but the animals that can't survive are the kittens because they just require, around-the-clock attention, really. So we're fostering kittens. We give them back tomorrow. It's going to be terrible. But we got them when they were about 4 weeks old, and we'll keep them until they are 1.8 pounds or 8 weeks. And so that turns out to be about tomorrow. And then the Humane Rescue Alliance takes them back, and they'll spay and neuter them, and then they'll put them out for adoption. And kittens are adopted really very quickly. So we will hope to help out by fostering some more kittens later on this summer. Maybe try to solve the heartbreak of giving these up.
Very nice. Do you play any musical instruments or anything
Who
like
have you been talking to? I play the piano, but I am also learning to play the banjo.
Really?
This is my midlife crisis. Yeah.
What drew you to start playing the banjo?
Well, Steve Martin and Edie Brickell put out this CD a few years ago. And Steve Martin is a comedian, of course, but he's an incredibly talented banjo player. And it's just fun. It's really fun to listen to. And I always said to my daughters, as I would drive them to school in the morning, I'm going to learn how to play the banjo. I'm going to learn how to play the banjo. And they gave me a banjo for Christmas a couple of years ago. So
have you played or played any songs yet? Or
oh, well, I play songs, but no, I have not put on my first paid gig yet. No.
We'll be staying tuned for that one.
Right, yes.
So what do you like to do in your free time when you're not working or bottle feeding kittens or playing the banjo? What fills your time?
Well, I like to travel, as do I think almost all the people who live in Washington. We like to get out of town. I like to cook, and now that it's summer, we spend a lot of time talking about cooking, thinking about cooking, going to farmers markets, making stuff up on the fly.
Do you have a specific dish you like to make, or?
No, whatever looks good at the farmers market.
Very much so. Where's the best place that you've traveled to, or a destination that you go to often?
Well, every summer we go to Bald Head Island, to the beach. This is a wonderful island off the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina. No cars on the island, golf carts only. So that's a wonderful family vacation that we're all counting the days for. But we are planning our next big family trip to Japan. We're hoping to go there over the holidays in 2021. So we're already thinking about it and trying to save our points and miles so we can have a big trip.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Very much so. So throughout everyone that you've worked with your career on Capitol Hill, who would you say has been probably one of the biggest mentors? It could be one person or it could be many.
There have been so many. I was thinking about this and preparing for this interview. I've never had a bad job. So, there have just been people every step of the way who have really helped me. In my current job, of course, John Gordley's been a great boss to me. Just a lot of expertise, but also we have a really fun and close office, so it's a fun place to work. I worked closely with Krista Harden when she was here. Dale Thorenson in our office has been here almost as long as I have, so we go back an awfully long way. But it was great working on the Hill, working for Senator Kerry. Was a great time. I did a short stint in Omaha working for the Douglas County Commissioners, where I worked for Howard Buffett, who's another name that's floating around in agriculture circles. So that was great. And then, of course, my experience at AmAg with Rick and with Art Barnaby, who was an Ag Econ professor at Kansas State. Just all things that kind of build up to look like a career that makes a lot of sense, but they just all happened. But all of those people have been incredibly helpful to me.
Now, before we wrap up this interview, we like to always ask this question, but if you could go back to day one, knowing what you know now, like what would you tell young Bev on her very first day?
On her very first day. Take advantage of every opportunity. I mean, when I worked on the Hill, it's getting to be long enough ago that there were junkets. I didn't go on all of them. I should have. I didn't go on the trip to California because it was 3 or 4 days. I didn't want to devote that much time. They did a trip for Hill staffers. I should have gone. I wish I'd gone. I still have never been on a trip to see California agriculture. So, what would you do differently? And then also sleep more, get more sleep. So those two things, do everything and sleep more. I don't know if they go together or not.
Awesome. Well, Bev Paul, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hannah.